An organism drifting in a void will move continuously until it is abruptly forced to recognize invisible physical barriers. Humans are born into a similar state of isolation. We arrive entirely unaware of our physical limits and must immediately learn through trial and error where the self ends and the external world begins. When we examine a modern penal system, we see rigid architecture, steel grates, and strict bureaucratic administration. We assume this structure exists simply to isolate those who have already broken the law. But correction is more than an end-stage treatment for offenders. It is the vital essence of a society, a process of adjustment that begins long before a crime is committed. This document analyzing criminal administration points out that the rules of compliance are established in infancy. A child's behavior is guided from the very start by the stark realization of what is me and what is not me. The child learns to differentiate between behavior that yields pleasure and behavior that results in pain. Modifying actions to avoid painful, forbidden, or undesirable ends is the most basic process of correction. The objective here is to trace the geometry of that conditioning. We need to see how the psychological boundaries learned by a single child expand and calcify into the laws of an empire. To observe this transition clearly, we will examine the establishment of British penal policy over the Indian subcontinent. Before we can decipher the motives behind a foreign power's prisons, we have to construct a working model of the psychological architecture of compliance. At the micro level, an infant possesses zero autonomy. Survival depends entirely upon total reliance on its progenitors. Psychoanalysts like Otto Rank argued that this total dependence is shattered by the birth trauma, the initial shock that forces the individual to recognize their physical separation from the mother. As the child ages, these isolated experiences multiply. Sociologists classify this expanding web of interactions as the process of socialization. According to the text, this mirrors a biological baseline. In nature, living organisms inherently group together to form clusters. Applied to humans, this results in the sociological dictum that man is gregarious by nature. The instinct is to flock together and seek company. But as individuals gather into clusters, the friction of proximity demands agreed-upon patterns of interpersonal behavior. The group draws a boundary line. This line dictates the permissible limits of conduct, separating actions that sustain the group from actions that harm it. An individual's willingness to stay within that line fluctuates. Shifts in consciousness, stress, or necessity alter how a person perceives those norms. Deviance is simply the mechanical act of a node transgressing those prescribed limits. Preservation of any social cluster relies on the organized prevention and control of these transgressing nodes. When a society scales up to the macro level, informal group norms are replaced by the state. The state officially codifies the control of deviance through the mechanism of law. We assume law is a universal standard of fairness, but lawgivers prescribe rules in the name of a justice that eludes consensus. What authority claims as justice is hotly debated, often representing nothing more than dictatorial power or a simple majority vote. The criminologist Stephen Schaeffer provided a precise framework for understanding what the law actually executes. Schaeffer argues lawmaking shapes societal morality according to the values the ruling power believes in. The law delivers objective judgments, evaluating actions only against the authority's value system. This creates a binary. Those who accept these definitions are conformists. Those who refuse are criminals. Law is the forceful imposition of a top-down value grid onto an organic network. The state demands that all members perform their social roles accordingly, under threat of penalty. Criminal law operates as a coercive architecture. Its primary function is to mandate conformity to the ruling power. To see this theoretical model applied in historical reality, we examine the development of administration in modern India. Prior to British occupation, the subcontinent maintained a highly stable Hindu social order that operated independently of shifting political dynasties. Within this civilization, loyalty was intensely localized. A person's obligations were to their family, their village, and their caste, rarely to the state itself. The British influx began while Mughal rule was at its zenith. initiating a severe disruption to that localized social order. Historical records indicate that the subsequent annexation of territory and consolidation of rule was a planned, motivated action directed toward specific goals. The English were not the legal inheritors to the empire. To secure their new position as paramount rulers, they faced pressing requirements to control the vast population. Correctional administration became the primary measure employed to meet those needs. British penal policy wasn't introduced to deliver universal justice. It was the specific tool deployed to forcefully align Indian society into the new imperial grid. Criminologists traditionally take a horizontal approach, looking at present-day data to study deviance and its handling. But assessing current crime statistics obscures the original intent of the system. To accurately evaluate the state's motives, we have to tilt the perspective down the historical axis and take a longitudinal view. The criminologist David Fogel established a core rule for this type of analysis. Modern institutions never arrive fully formed. Reviewing these texts shows Fogel's precise framing. Penal systems are historical products of custom, emerging hesitantly from the past. To understand our prison development, we must strip back those layers and examine what was on the minds of the contemporaries who built them. The English philosopher George Bernard Shaw documented the darker psychological motive operating beneath the surface of the law. Shaw observed that society brings its citizens up to believe they are justified in inflicting injuries on anyone against whom they can make a case of moral inferiority. Lord Palmerston voiced a similar sentiment before the House of Commons in 1859 while introducing the bill to abolish the East India Company. Palmerston stated that the passion in the human heart to inflict injury upon others is actually stronger than the desire to be free from injustice. The state captures this human passion and institutionalizes it. The value grid defines who is morally inferior, and the prison provides the venue to legally inflict the injury. When we analyze the deepest layers of state control, we find the exact same mechanisms of pain and avoidance used to condition an isolated infant. History acts as the only framework capable of piercing the illusion of justice, revealing the true architecture of compliance beneath every society.